today I have my very good friend and special guest, Karen Peabody, who is a licensed therapist and social worker. Karen, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good. I'm so glad that we are finally doing this podcast together. Karen has been a friend of mine for so many years, and we ended up it's funny, I feel like a couple years ago, I really wanted to try to do something with YouTube, and I had you come to my house, and I said, all right, let's talk. Let's see what happens. And so there is an actual video of us on my YouTube channel talking about probably trauma.
Probably trauma.
Because Karen is my favorite trauma therapist, and I feel like trauma is such a mainstream word now. It's almost like a popular word.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right in the mental health community, especially during COVID, there were so many things that have happened where I feel like so many people opened up with their mental health and realized that they may need to actually speak to a professional. So all of a sudden, the word trauma started to just get more and more popular. And then the word trigger, trauma,
Sure.
all
I think
of that.
Also in the mental health world, trauma is in its infancy of understanding, but it's still a big deal because we haven't made a whole lot of other gains with bipolar and schizophrenia and all these other things, but trauma really in the last 25 years has made these significant gains of understanding it a little bit more. So I think that was happening as the world was also opening up to that it's not necessarily a bad thing or a weakness to be suffering with any kind of emotional distress.
And I'm so glad that you said that, because there's so many people to this day that I do see that are struggling, and I'm very pro therapy. I'm always talking about it in my podcasts and my gallery readings. Like, I think everyone should give therapy a shot. And
I do too.
Yes.
I do too.
And there's just so many layers to the human being. And, you know, I had a friend that attempted therapy, and she went about 4 sessions, and I said, oh, are you still going? And she said, well, no, I went. I did 4 sessions, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, wait, what? What about the other 30 plus years of your life?
Right.
You know, like there's just so many layers. And so you can see a therapist, talk about maybe the main issue that you're going in for, but then through that main issue, you end up seeing that there's so many other situations, or again, I'll use that fun word, trigger, you know, where you're like, oh my gosh, why did I get triggered on that? Or why did I think about it that way? And then you realize, oh, I need to uncover and dive into why I think this way. Is it because of my parents? Is it because of my friends? Is it because what other stimulants that have created this idea in my head that is now processed into the way of maybe me feeling blocked in my life?
I think that's what we've kind of uncovered with trauma therapy is it's not necessarily what's happened to you right in the moment. It is what you've lived through that let you perceive right in the moment has been so detrimental to you, which that's a hard concept to really understand, because a lot of people are like, oh, you know, my childhood was fine. It was like everybody else's, and everybody was doing the same thing. You heard probably in our age, you know, like, oh, everybody got hit with a belt. That's not a big deal. But the truth is, like, being in a constant state of fear, being in a constant state of anxiety, not being able to articulate your feelings or have somebody that listens starts to set up a dynamic that might make you a little more susceptible to something bigger going on in your life. So you think that bigger thing is the trauma, but the trauma really started way back when nobody was there to help you.
Oh, I love this.
So I heard this interesting thing. I also just listen to podcasts all the time. And I heard this really interesting thing. I don't know who said it, and I didn't make it up, but I want to take credit for it. For children, when their parent is a regular person too, regular people do this too, is really struggling with something and might lash out at the child doesn't stop loving their parent any less. They just stop loving themselves less. So, when we think of that, a million things, whether they were intentional or not, do that to people. So you're kind of coming into adulthood this fragmented sense of self, you know, trying to kind of figure out the world while you have all these pressures. So it doesn't take much to really spin people out and say a car accident. We get people all the time that's like, I have no idea why I'm so affected by this car accident. And 10 sessions later, we're talking about 5 years old when they were left, you know, at a babysitter's house that they didn't feel really comfortable with. Maybe nothing significant happened, but just that feeling of like abandonment and not caring for leads to certain kind of traumas.
Wow.
It's crazy when you think about it.
And I've known this, but I just love hearing you talk about it because it's you know, I touch a little bit on trauma again with some of my clients, although I am not a trained professional, licensed professional like you are. And it really does blow my mind when I hear and I see it, you know, like there's, you know, avoidance. People will avoid certain situations because if maybe they're afraid of feeling certain things.
Certainly.
So instead of feeling certain things, we get that all the time in relationships. Instead of like feeling like this sense of love, like, oh wait, someone might have a connection with me, someone might love me, that person will then just leave the situation so they don't allow themselves to be loved.
It could be foreign, right? And we're always a little bit nervous of what we don't understand. So if you didn't get this all-encompassing love and support, if you meet somebody in your life that really provides that, we're skeptical of that. We don't know how to deal with it. So even if it seems dysfunctional, if you lived that life, if you saw that kind of parental relationship, you will probably be a little more gravitated to that in your adult life. Even if it doesn't feel good, you're just more used to it.
Because it feels like home.
Yeah, yeah.
And home isn't always the most comfortable place.
This is always my sticking point. So I see adults with trauma mostly, you know, and the work that I do somatic experience primarily with people, but these are just different kinds of modalities that we do with people with trauma. We do EMDR and we do EFT and gentle reprocessing. They're just different ways to actually get in touch with the trauma in your body because you probably don't have words for it because either it was too much that you never built a story around it. So if you haven't built a story around it, you can't really talk about it, but you can feel it. I won't, but I could ask you to feel a certain thing connected to a certain incident in your life and you would automatically feel it.
Oh, this is like, so guys, everybody that's listening. So I was going through something like every day. But this one particular time I was going through something and I was talking to Karen candidly and she said, okay, I'm going to try this. You're going to be my guinea pig.
This is not how you do clinical therapy.
I know,
but we are really good friends.
Right.
So
That's what I mean. It was like an everyday conversation.
We couldn't continue the conversation because she was actually, we call it going down a trauma vortex.
Oh, that
you were actually
everyday
going
life.
Down a trauma vortex and I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Okay.
Meanwhile, this is Tiff. So anyway, so I was going down this vortex and she's like, all right, she's like, all right, Tiff, this is what I want you to do. And you had me like hold out my finger. Well, first I had to identify where I felt it and where my anxiety, that's the best way I can describe it, felt like an anxious knot, like an anxious ball. And I got it right in my stomach. And that's where it always goes, is right in my stomach, which is also, if we're going to add a little spirituality to it, that's your solar plexus chakra, where it's that I am, it's that confidence.
Yeah.
Okay. So obviously there's some inferior issues that I have where there's insecurity in my own confidence.
Something was threatening your confidence, your stability, and your safety.
Yes. So then I feel like you might have a better idea of how to explain this rather than me, but I can add in how I was feeling as it was going.
So the somatic experience allows you to oscillate back and forth to a place of safety in your body that you can feel, that makes you feel peaceful and calm, and then maybe where it's not so comfortable. So we do that so it doesn't overwhelm the person, because we know a trauma already overwhelmed them. So you don't keep them in that state so they continue to fall more down the trauma vortex. We oscillate back and forth to a place of safety, and then they're able to tolerate the feeling of trauma. And when you were able to do that, we were able to kind of pull it apart a little bit, and it wasn't even about what was happening. It was about something else that kind of happened, and just making that connection, that realization that you're not going to die right at that moment. Your whole life isn't going to fall apart, and this is a little bit of spread out feeling. We are able to dissipate that a little bit.
So you had me like hold out my finger, right? And then I did it in so I used my pointer finger so you guys can get the visual. I used my pointer finger and I was going in like a circular rotation.
And that was only because when you were talking to me and I was saying, where do you feel this in your body? You were saying, it's right here. It's right here. So
I'm a handsy type of talker.
Yeah,
yes.
You were going down the trauma vortex. So I was just made you slow it down. So you had more control over it. So that was just something I'm trying to authentically use what I see in front of me, because this is how you're expressing yourself. And I'm trying to make it go in slow motion, because that's one of the problems with trauma is that it goes so fast, and it starts to fragment your memory, and you can't use your frontal cortex to logically think about this problem. You just kind of go into panic mode. So we slowed it down so it was a little more tolerable. And when we slowed it down, you were able to see there was actually branches off this trauma, and they kind of expanded in different ways. So it was just more tolerable to get a hold of it a little bit.
Right. And then I started crying.
Yeah.
Which I do best. Release. I cry all the time. I cry when I'm sad. I cry when I'm angry.
But that's the release. That was the release of being able to kind of, because then, you just try and think of like all this adrenaline and cortisol is going on, because your body only knows safety and danger. That's it. We have two systems. So yes, we oscillate back and forth of right now we're in safety. So we're able to sit here and talk and use our frontal cortex and do all these things. Your body was in danger at that time, and that's what it was telling you. So the release of all that buildup of cortisol and adrenaline was able to kind of come out with the tears and the breath of you were kind of, breathing a little bit heavy, and that's your body trying to re-regulate itself to a normal state.
Wow. Oh, I love this.
Yeah, it was crazy.
I just love learning about all of this.
We talk about it all the time.
I know we do. Because I'm like, but wait, but why? Right? Mm-hmm. And it's funny because being friends, right? Like, every once in a while, if I'm going through something, I'm like, I don't know, Karen, why do you think that would be?
And I'm like, do you want to know from me, or do you want to know the clinical sense?
Right. And then like sometimes she'll say something like, I had the weirdest thing happened. I saw this cardinal, and I'm like, okay, well, you know who that is. Say hello to your dad.
No. I saw that this morning, as a matter of fact.
I did too. I saw it in my yard.
Yeah, right in front of my window.
Yes.
I'm like, I'm doing it. Yeah,
there you go. There you go. Well, and it's funny because I always say, well, I'm a spirit medium, but I'm human first. And you're a trauma therapist, but you're human first too. Mm-hmm. And I know you were a little nervous about even coming on the podcast.
I know. I could do talk. I don't want to do like video, but
I know video is always a little nerve wracking, mm-hmm. But of course it makes sense. We're both wearing black.
I know.
Again, we're like the same person.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, so we talked a little bit about we talked a little bit about the somatic healing, but there's so many different types of trauma. So is there different, you would know, is there different categories to trauma?
Yeah, there's definitely different categories. There's different significant levels of trauma too. And they're all like important, but there is what most people know is there's PTSD, which that is a significant event where you thought you would lose your life.
Which is post-traumatic stress disorder.
That you thought you would lose your life. Or if you're a child, you thought your parent would lose your life, because that's the equivalent. If something happened to your parent, then your safety is also jeopardized too. And interesting enough, you do not actually have to experience it yourself. We saw plenty of people at 9/11, at the marathon bombings, that just saw the event on TV get post-traumatic stress syndrome, because it's not about the event. It's about where you came from in your life and how you perceive the event.
Oh, so I understand, and maybe people that are listening. Because I remember those two events, I remember exactly where I was, what was happening, and so forth. So if I saw it and it affected me where I had PTSD, it would be me thinking about my past.
Well, it would
Is
be
that
you
what you mean?
reacting about your past. Most people can't logically like put it together. And also a caveat to this is PTSD is recurrent physical symptoms 6 to 12 months after an event happens. You have to give yourself some grace period. The first 6 months to 8 months after an event happens, it's normal to have bad dreams, to have anxiety, to have some resistance of going to places that remind you of the event. You know, that's normal and that's resourceful, and people should be experiencing that, even though it's really uncomfortable. They should get support through it, and hopefully support is
Right.
normalizing this is what your body needs to do after an event like that.
Right.
That's a healing thing. But if it goes on longer than that and people start to get the inability to sleep, the inability to eat, they really want to retreat from life, they're not interested in sex, friendships, anything like that, then you're probably falling more into the PTSD kind of syndrome that should be treated.
Okay.
You know, that's pretty important. They have significant triggers that gives them a physical effect. They hear a sound and they start to have a physical reaction to it.
Wow.
So that's PTSD. There is chronic PTSD, and that is more like neglect or not abuse per se, but kind of neglect in childhood years of this, just like the environment isn't the most loving and supportive environment to kind of live in. So it doesn't need to be significant. It's significant to that person, but
Right.
I think a lot of people come in that might have chronic PTSD and they often say, nothing bad happened in my life. Nothing bad happened. It was normal. But what they are doing is they're normalizing a situation in which they weren't nurtured. They've normalized it.
And they don't even realize that they weren't nurtured.
Yeah, they have no idea that they weren't nurtured. And then, then there's other kind of things. Sometimes some of the weirder things that happen about the phobias and stuff like that. Like, it's so interesting. People don't know, like, phobias can be cleared usually in a session with like with like these trauma modalities of it's easy to clear if they're not complicated.
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
This just fascinates me.
Yeah, it's super interesting.
All of it.
And so this is my I'm going to go on a soapbox here.
Do it.
I don't know if I think this came because I have a 13-year-old son. So I wasn't really exposed to kids. Here's my own traumas. Let me go into my own traumas here.
Well, I was going to say, I'm like, you can, because you and I have talked on a personal note. So if you want to use me as an example, go for it. I'm always so vulnerable and open.
You
okay.
can. I won't disclose anything.
Oh,
but here I am like with this new baby, which I had never really been exposed to babies before. I don't know. There just wasn't a whole lot of awareness, and so I had this little boy, and I was like, oh my god, he's so loving. Like, he's so fun, and I didn't know little boys could be so fun and happy and. I don't know. So now he's 13, and I still in awe think that about him and all his friends. They're just adorable, and like they're so supportive to one another. And then I kind of watched this interesting thing, like, they were so cute at 6, and they could wear galoshes in the grocery store, and he could wear a cape everywhere. And I was just like, oh my god, I love it. I'll live here
Yeah.
do it all, Sam. And at 9, all of a sudden, like, I saw people treating him differently, like, be stronger, or like, I remember somebody saying, which nobody meant this, but they were like, oh yeah, like, what a little stud. And I was like, whoa, stop right there. Like, cause he was the same little boy that still like loved to like play and do everything, and I saw him like repressing this fun side. Like, he was really pushing back like into this social norm that was being created for him of don't feel like, go play football. That was really what it was about, is like, and he could not understand, like, wait a minute, this is my best friend. I don't want to put his face in the dirt. Like,
Right.
This is my best friend. They were like, no, do it. Like, this is what all the kids do. And I was like, this is so wrong. This is what we do to men. of you're adorable one day, and then all of a sudden, like, they turn 8 and 9 and they're like, be tougher, be strong, don't cry, don't feel like, you know, all the things we do. You should go sleep with a whole bunch of girls and don't feel anything. Who cares? And who cares about rejection? And it is so, like, men are so affected by trauma that because they have been stuffing and stuffing and stuffing for so long that they become silent. Like, I do this training for first responders, and they're so funny because they're so resistant to this, and like usually they're forced. And so I was saying, the last one was kind of on Zoom, and I was kind of saying, you know, if you're 45 and you're outside by a fire listening to music by yourself, drinking beers, that's not a relaxation kind of deep stressor for you. That's actually a symptom. And they're all like, what? of now this is where you've got to, because we've forced you to stuff your feelings for so long.
That is so profound, and you are so right.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's exactly what me and my friends talk about.
Yeah, this is a symptom that, like, men should be this version of strength, and they buy it and we feed it, and that's what happens. And we're like, you know, why doesn't my husband talk to me? And obviously it's not your fault that all these things have happened, but we have taught men to be this. We don't allow them to be something different.
And that's why a lot of them don't do the work, because that means that they would have to put themselves in a vulnerable state.
It's so far out of their wheelhouse. It's funny when I, you know, because I see a lot of men in therapy, and when I'm trying to do somatic experience with them, we start with like feeling a place of comfort in your body, and they're like, nothing. And so we just be patient and we try and allow that to evolve, but it is so far out of their wheelhouse, which, like, I can relate. Like, I'm like that. I have to give so much to kind of be present and to understand where other people are. I've got nothing right inside of myself, except when I watch movies of I am a crying, blubbering mess, and my kids are like, Mom's crying again, but I'm like, this is the only thing I've got. This is the only way I can show my emotion. I can't show it. For 8 hours, I hear the worst stories and, you know, the most terrible things. I cannot have a reaction to that, because now people will be having a reaction that I'm having a reaction, and they're out of their space and they need this space. So I watch movies and I'm like, oh my God. They're like, this is family vacation. It's not even sad.
You're like, I'm a human too. I'm a human too.
I'm like, I have to repress my emotions all day long. I deserve this.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things, because in, you know, the dating world now, you know, and we try to, you know, date men. And I think a lot of times, you know, one of my podcasts, I joked about the whole ghosting, you know, and it's really like, where does that come from?
I know.
Where does
what
it,
an
like,
easy out. What, like, technology has given such an easy out to people of, like, you know, all relationships of, this is work. Relationships are work, you know, marriage is work, and it's in seasons. It's not in, you know, having a bad week, or that's a drop in the bucket of what relationships are. And everybody wants one, but they do not understand the amount of work and tolerance and vulnerability it takes to have one.
Vulnerability. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Oh, I hate talking. No, I'm just kidding.
I know.
I hate talking.
It's so funny because I am such a, like, an emotional sponge all the time. And I mean, my career, I'm always dealing with people in grief. And then when I'm doing a gallery reading, a lot of times I caught myself crying with them, you know, and just feeling it and feeling, because I'm always, and I'll ask people too, like, how does that make you feel? Like, whenever I talk to my friends, like, they'll tell me something and I'll say, well, how does that make you feel? Like, I'm just like that. So I love being in my vulnerable state, because I always want to get down to the bottom of things.
Right.
It could be because I'm an Aries too, and I'm like, I need to find answers.
But it's so interesting of, like, nobody can really escape vulnerability.
But they all try.
Yeah, they do all try.
They all try. So
because,
is that,
like, there's this social norm of who we should be. you know?
Well, just like you said, when you saw your son, he came from being this little boy of like, la, 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 look at him in this cape, to now at 9, which he's still a little boy, where you put him in an athletic program and all of a sudden they're scouting him out.
Right.
And he needs to be a man all of a sudden.
Yeah.
At 9 years old, because he has to be rough and tough and know strategy and learn. His poor brain isn't even developed until what, 25? Like,
yeah. Can you imagine if somebody, like, this is weird, but if somebody said to us, like, okay, you're friends, now throw her on the ground.
Right. Like, and cheer about it.
We would
and let's
never
cheer.
be able to do that. Like, why do we think little boys can do that?
Right.
They can't do that.
Exactly.
And not be confused about it and not like have like this weird sense of like, how do I act in the world if all of a sudden this is okay and my dad is saying this is okay, and these coaches that I look up to, like, there has to be, if there is a way for that to be accepted, which I don't know, there has to be much more explanation about how is this accepted? Like, how do you really kind of internalize this new message that we're giving you?
Well, and then the messed up side of things is because how I've seen it, it might be different in other towns, but I think not. I'm pretty confident in what I'm about to say, is that if your child doesn't play a sport, then the culture around their school, it's almost like other kids are just kind of the kids that are in like the art class or the drama class, or maybe not even in a class but just going to school.
Which is crazy though, because I feel like that's influenced by adults more than kids.
Absolutely,
kids
yes,
all the time just like loving on each other and respecting each other and noticing these differences and really kind of holding that in honor for each other. And it's the adults that have been already preconditioned to this notion that
so
like
annoying.
kind of keep it going.
It's so annoying.
It's taxing. It's a taxing environment.
But yeah, I saw that and I was like, why is there such a social divide here?
Yeah.
Yeah,
but
so
weird.
that goes along from what their parents want their kids to be, because that's all the parents know.
Yeah, and that maybe that's what they experience too.
Oh my gosh. So we are going to go through, there's so much to go over with you. Okay. So of course I was like, let's talk about ghosting, but then, but it's all about how
it's avoidance though.
Yeah.
It's all avoidance, and it's not being able to identify what you feel, even if that message is kind of difficult to give of, I've met somebody else, or we're not connecting, or taking that time to really honor, like, this is a person that has feelings that, I owe it to them to kind of tell them where I'm at. That's something that people haven't connected with because they're not as in tune as they need to be.
And it goes back to a point probably when they were a little boy. And I'm not saying it's just all boys here, guys. Girls do the ghosting too.
Sure.
But we were talking about boys, so that's why. So, as a little boy, you're taught to just repress your emotions.
Yeah.
Repress. Don't tell them how you're feeling. Don't be transparent.
Don't
at
make
all.
other people upset. Don't get yourself upset. I think don't make other people upset is, by the time I see men where they're at, they have no response to a lot of things because they think that they're going to make other people upset. Whether that is true or not, I don't know. But just that idea of don't make people upset will keep people silent. And then they're locked in themselves, right?
Gosh.
I know.
It's awful. It's just like with little girls are taught to be pretty little girls, and also like don't speak up. Don't, make sure you are aware of being the nurturer too. Like these little girls are trained to,
and go with the flow of, so I have a daughter too, and she's in gymnastics, which like I will just always foster a strength within herself of she just knows what she wants, and she almost 100% refuses to be assisted, and I think they know her pretty well now, so they're kind of like, oh, choo-choo, just don't touch her, but when it was kind of brought to my attention, I'm like, yeah, I think I'm going to support my 9-year-old daughter that has a leotard on, not wanting anybody to touch her physical body. I think I'm going to support that right now. So maybe I've just dashed her Olympic hopes for being a gymnast, but we'll go with that.
Yeah.
and will just foster. She has the right to say when somebody touches her body or not.
Right. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And so obviously we were talking about the differences, but we just brought up something about how there were, we talk about the social divide in school, where if you're not playing a sport, you may be looked down upon. And you mentioned it was with the parents and maybe how the parents were feeling. And so let's take that a step further. Do you think that there are situations, and I believe you call it generational trauma?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So in that respect, maybe it's not with the school, but I just made me think about that. That popped up in my head, and I wanted to talk about a little bit more about generational trauma. Could that be what's the word I'm looking for here? A factor. Mm-hmm. Could that be a factor of generational trauma? Just because it's like, okay, you have to possess this strength. You have to possess being the alpha, which that doesn't make you an alpha, guys. But you have to be the alpha. You have to be like the best quarterback.
It very well could. So generational trauma is kind of when usually a group of people kind of experience something significant in their life, pretty significant enough that it actually changes the chemical structure of your body, which all trauma does, but it changes it significantly enough that that wound can be passed down from generation to generation. And there was a study that was done with mice that were getting electrical shocks with a certain water that they were drinking. So that was really embedded in them. Don't drink that water because you get an electrical shock. And so the next generation bred kept that aversion going for 7 generations deep.
So even though they weren't getting shocked at all,
they were not getting shocked,
but it was already imprinted in their cellular level
that they stayed away from that water. And that study was like replicated time and time again. So a very real kind of thing. And we see that with people. Like, we certainly know that there are classes of people, even there are certain kind of behaviors that go along, like people that lived through busing in Boston, people that lived through genocides that have happened of their ancestors have generational trauma.
Can you elaborate a little bit more? Just so, like, I know we've talked about this, mm-hmm. but for people that are listening, because we always hear, again, that's another catchphrase, generational trauma. It must be generational trauma. We got to break the bonds,
Right.
So can you elaborate more on maybe like an example? So
I think sometimes with generational trauma, people don't recognize it so much. It just is a fiber of their being because it's what they were taught and what their parents were taught. So they don't recognize it so much to being a factor in their life. It's just this like personality kind of ideas that they have that they don't realize don't align with their own ideas, but they've lived through for so long. And it usually, I find in my clinical practice, it usually is intertwined with like alliances and how much attention needs to be, drawn to certain people, of kind of how people have relationships per se.
Okay. So like maybe different nationalities may have different types of relationships.
Right.
So,
or not even nationalities, of just, you just never know, like, I don't think that we have incredibly accurate historical understanding of what people kind of went through in certain situations. So I just think that generational trauma really hasn't been uncovered as much as we want to be, to really have like these symptoms that we see regularly. I think people don't really realize they have generational trauma.
So even more of an example, like, is there, and you can use me as an example with my stuff that mm-hmm. Is there anything to like, and the reason why, because I want people to really understand it. Mm-hmm. Like, is there an example that you could give?
One of the things that I think about that I don't know has really been research per se, but we definitely know, like, if you have a child young in life, like a teen pregnancy, the chances of that child having a young child is significantly enhanced, like statistically significantly enhanced, so that it's a profound kind of number.
So this is all like history repeats itself.
Right.
If you grew up in an abusive style domestic abuse parent relationship, chances are you're probably going to be in that type of relationship.
Sure. And I think a lot of people before were like, oh, is that nature versus nurture? But now we're trying to understand it a little bit more. Is this more of a generational trauma based injury? It's not like, oh, you're abusive because you saw it. Like, maybe you're abusive, and there's other elements to it too, but like maybe you're abusive because there are things in your genetics that have kind of happened that don't allow you to be another way. And that's not an excuse for it whatsoever. Of we're always just trying to understand it deeper. So the only way you can understand it is to really look at it and look at it from all sides, not just villainizing people that don't have great behavior. Like those are wounded people too.
Right. No, okay, I see it. So it's more like in that category of history repeating itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I talk very openly that I'm adopted, and my mom had me at 16, and my whole life could have been different if she didn't give me up for adoption.
Certainly.
That's how I view it, is that I was given a different lifestyle.
Right.
I don't have children, and I'm 29. But
certainly.
No, but ultimately, yeah, I mean, it very well could have happened, but you do see that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you do see that a lot. So, and it's when you realize it's all about the individual too, realizing like, okay, I can have this opportunity or that opportunity. I can continue to stay in the same environment.
If you can recognize it, a lot of this stuff kind of goes under the radar and you don't realize it. Like even on much, much smaller levels of, I think, because we also talk a lot of business kind of stuff. Of to own your own business and try and be successful, you really need to have a different frame of mind. And you and I think kind of came from the same background of, this was pie in the sky stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
We were out there with like, I'm not suffering with money anymore. Like I'm going to do something different. But that was like out there,
right.
And that a little bit of a like generational trauma of like, nope, you stay right here. You're right here.
Yeah.
And you do your 9 to 5 and you if you're lucky, you put in your retirement. And like you and I were both like, no.
We can't do it. I know. No. And for years, even like my mom doesn't say it too much to me now, but like for years she'd be like, do you want to go get another job? Like, you're just going to give people readings? That's all you're going to do? And I remember you telling me one of your friends was like, so wait, Tiff only does readings? That's it? And you're like, yeah, she's killing the game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it.
My mother's always like, so how's the little business going?
Yes. How's your business?
Mom, I own 2 buildings.
Yeah.
Like, are you kidding me? Like, give me a break.
Still,
and she's like, did you make your husband dinner?
Yes.
Like that's her generational trauma.
Oh, yes.
She's just like, I don't know. I don't know how Mark puts up with you. I'm like, because I pay him. Yeah. Like, I don't know.
I pay for everything, and I just bought a hot tub, Mom. We're good.
He works too, and he works very hard.
Oh, yeah,
too.
he does.
Yeah.
He is a hard worker.
But I'm just like, oh, thank God I married somebody that's just like, yes, do your thing. We would not be able to make it work.
Oh, my gosh.
But like, she really is just like, have you learned to fold laundry yet? Which is still to this day.
Well,
no.
It's the same. My mom, same thing. Like I would go out to dinner with you and I would say, I went out to dinner with Karen. And she would say, oh, her husband lets her go out like that. And he has to watch the kids. I'm like, what? What?
I remember when she was in my kitchen and she was like, that is so nice that he lets her go when the kids are so little. But
we just laugh.
I know, but for a long time, I fought that with her until I really realized that that's her generational trauma. Yeah. And God love her. She can cook a meal like nobody's business. She can fold laundry like nobody's business, but it was never in her wheelhouse that I know of to do something completely. I was like, I need to take care of myself. If something should happen and my whole world falls apart, I need to have something that's mine that I can do, that I don't need to have somebody else do. But that's probably 7 generations away from where I came from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I feel like it always happens from within. Like I knew, I talk about my story, how I went through my divorce, lost my job of 9 years, got into my first car accident. So I had no job, no house, no car. My marriage was null and void. And I woke up in my old bedroom. At the time, my mom was working for Blue Cross Blue Shield. Saying,
Hello, this is Good Morning Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Yeah, and I woke up and it was like I was in a movie, and I just remember looking around my room and I'm like, well, shit. Like, what am I going to do? And I'm like, sink or swim. But you have two options. And I'm like, I'm going to have to freaking swim. And so from that point on, I made the changes. And by going to therapy, going to see you, and I remember like, well, you know, talking and saying like, I was crying. You're like, but why are you crying? And I'm like, because I'm going through a divorce. And you're like, yeah, but why do you have to cry about it? And it made me think, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not that sad about it. Like, I'm sad, but I'm sad about losing everything.
Right, because
like
at that
loss.
time, too, you were also, you know, I guess this is like kind of going through your stuff. The divorce was very, very sad. And I think as a person, you really loved him, but he was a safety that you were breaking away from because you were doing. I mean, I remember thinking for years, like, this chick is working 18 hours a day, like doing your day job, and then at night trying to make something happen with all like the ghost hunting and everything that like you could tell really made you excited, and you saw a vision in that. And you know, I think there was a lot of story around like, oh, you should be sad, which you were sad, and it was really, really hard, but you were also creating something for yourself that was really powerful.
Yes, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it had to happen the way that it did.
Right.
But we evolve as humans, and when we do the work and we hold ourselves accountable, we learn that we have to evolve.
Right. I think I had a similar story of my father died when I was 20, and I lived with him. You know, I lived with him since I was 14.
When didn't our dads pass on the same day, or was it his birthday?
Or
What's
birthdays.
September 1st?
September's his first is his birthday.
And that's when my dad passed away, yeah.
So my dad was very, because nobody went to college, and, you know, my older brother did, but nobody went to college before that. And so he was very, very like pro college. And that was kind of like, he was the only one on my side. And so he really struggled with alcoholism, and he didn't go to my college graduation. So I was really, and so you didn't know back then. I didn't know that like people died from this, and he died like, you know, a month later. And I can remember losing it. Like, I was not a well person. And so I found myself, through a long story, in Phoenix Airport, trying to get back to Boston. And I think I was just so upset when I made the ticket, I made it for the wrong day. And I had plastic bags full of my underwear and socks. And the lady's like, you don't have a ticket today. And I just like lost it in Phoenix Airport, and they were like, put her on a plane. And
you would have been TikTok viral now if it happened.
I came back and I was like, I will never be in this position again. I will support myself. And I wasn't vulnerable enough to go to therapy, but I went to social work school. So the whole time I was in social work school, I was like, okay. That's my problem. Like, that's one of my problems. That was part of his problem, that he was an alcoholic. And it was from there that, like, everything really changed, and what wasn't possible started to be possible, because I was, like, kind of feeding myself and trying to take care of myself. But it had to all fall apart. If he was alive today, I would be that wife making that meal, ironing those clothes. I would be taking care of him. It would have been a very different life.
Right. And it's so crazy to me that like it's really how our parents shape us. But I find like we're like that like mere 1% of people where we just knew that there was something different. Yeah. You know, like we didn't
even know what the different was.
No, we didn't. But we just,
it can't be this.
It can't be this. This isn't meant for me.
Yeah.
Because I tried it, and it didn't make me feel good when I was doing it. Like working the 9 to 5 and doing even like sports. Like I love being active. And I want to talk about that too. Like I love being active, but like I was never like the best at sports. Like I was like mediocre. I was the kid picking dandelions
That's
in left
not
field.
mediocre.
You know,
That's like, can we?
Yeah.
Somebody else is going in right field.
like they would put me in like the most non-active location because I was like, wait, what?
I look at that as you want to be involved.
I love being involved. I love being included. Like I totally have FOMO all the time. Like if you were to tell me like, oh, we had friends over and we had a cookout, what'd you do? Nothing. Like, and I totally would feel bad because I'm like, well, I was home. I'm home. I always say that. I'm like, I'm home, guys. If anybody wants to do something, like I need to have that like inclusion
Right.
all the time.
Right.
Even if I can't go, I just want to be invited.
Yeah.
I just want
just
that,
send her
right?
the invite.
But that's okay. So that's something where I think that's completely normal. But if we look a little bit deeper into it,
You wonder. Yeah. You wonder.
abandonment, rejection, not feeling loved. Yep. That.
Orphanage for the first 4 months.
Yeah, orphanage. Okay, so I want to talk about that too. Okay, so, you know, I bring up that I'm adopted, right? And we talk about bonds and having bonds with our parents or siblings, what have you. And so I was born, and because I was 2 months early, I was put in an incubator for a month because I couldn't breathe on my own, but I had things to do. Typical. So, so after that, since I was put up for adoption, they put me into Boston Children's Services, where I wasn't fully adopted until about 4 months. So I was born in March, and then I was officially adopted in July. So those in between months, I was just kind of hanging out, trying to survive. So what impact of not getting the skin on skin and the bonding, like what happens?
It's huge.
And there you have it.
It's huge. So when babies are born, they have no sense of soothing themselves. That's why they're crying. You know, that's the only thing that they have to do. So the only way that they actually form a sense of soothing is through their mother. You know, and obviously their father is a part of this too, but their mother starts to give them their resource of being able to cry and have somebody pick you up and hold you skin to skin so you can really feel that sense of safety starts to resonate in babies. So that's huge. And again, I'm a big like education person, so there's been lots of studies.
We all want to know. Like everybody that's listening right now is probably like, so wait a minute, because there's so many amazing facets about this conversation all together. So we're taking this podcast and splitting it up into multiple episodes because I just want to keep
Good,
going.
because they're going to be like, they're all over the place.
I know. Well, the host has ADD, so that's kind of what happens. Okay.
So they don't have a sense of regulation for themselves until their mother actually gives it to them. So when there was babies that were studied in different orphanages around the world, what they saw was, you know, babies are still babies right when they're born, so they'll cry whenever they need some attention, which is only like feeding and diaper change and maybe even comfort. Babies actually, if they're not attended to, they stop making noise when they cry. They have the motion of crying, but they stop making noise and they stop producing tears.
That's
Because
so
they're almost
sad.
using all of their energy just to keep alive. So that's what your body does. It only uses a system of process that you need. And so the baby stops making tears. It's really, really hard. Really hard. And we know there's also a biological component to kind of this sense of ecosystem building inside of us, because we see it all the time, you know, in our child protective services of, even if parents aren't great parents, biological parents are always preferred for their children. There's such an importance to the biological connection that children have, that we have just in general.
I mean, nowadays with adoption, I know my friend adopted her son, and they knew the birth mom before the baby was born. The birth mom selected her as a parent. And so when she was going into labor, her and her husband flew to the location, and they were there for the delivery. And right when that baby was born, they placed him right on
And
my
I think
friend's chest.
That's what they've learned of. Obviously, if somebody can't take care of a baby, what a selfless act
Right.
to, like, you know, put a baby up for adoption. Whatever people have to do, you know, is amazing what they can do.
But back then,
yeah,
it wasn't like that.
learned
Yeah.
that through people. I think back then they were like, oh, keep people separate, and don't ever let them talk again. And we've learned that it's almost essential to have that kind of connection because it's a hard thing.
So what happens when a baby does not get that?
So I mean,
You're looking at
everybody's
it.
different, right? Everybody's different. It could go so far as reactive attachment disorder, which is like this really kind of anxiety-based disorder of dysregulation. You do not have it, so don't
thanks.
worry. But it's like this really difficult way of connecting with people, and there's a lot of chaos that kind of happens with that, or people could be fine, and people could live, with overcome some of the problems that they've had to kind of create a different sense of self to feel secure in this world. So the whole gamut's available to people.
Well, I will say on a personal level, I know once I was adopted, like I went through so many years of just being completely attached to my mom, almost unhealthy attached. Like I didn't want her to leave my sight. She would have to walk me in. First of all, I would make excuses. I'd go home sick all the time because I wanted.
Well, you probably felt sick too. You probably were getting physical feelings.
And it was probably anxiety, which I had no idea what anxiety was at the time. Right. But I would go down the nurse every day because I wanted to be home.
But
I wanted
see
to
where that lives inside of you too. It's not just a feeling you have. You actually had some physical symptomology that made your body feel unsafe.
Exactly. So like I said, I remember my mom walking me to my classroom in first grade, and I would have a meltdown, straight up meltdown. I couldn't let her leave my sight.
Yeah.
So that was probably a product of again, feeling like I don't want you to abandon me. Again, at 5 years old, I don't understand it.
Absolutely.
I just know that I'm going to have a meltdown because my mom's going to leave me for a couple hours.
Right.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And it's just a testament to how long it lives inside of you as a pretty predominant thing.
Well, because then it goes into like your friends. You have your friends and you grasp onto your friends, as you get older. And then relationships, you grasp onto the relationships because you just think that like this
makes me feel safe.
This makes me feel safe. And sometimes that leaves you with not seeing red flags right away.
Sometimes you
I mean, not with me. I see those red flags right away.
Adopt
and I cut
3
those.
dogs.
Yeah. I adopt 3 dogs to feel loved at all times. Yeah. Need attention at all times.
But people are just trying to do what they need to do to heal themselves. Like,
right.
They're really just trying to always do the best that they can with what they have.